The great dragon of the East, Kang Dae-hyun, the head of the Mafia syndicate, was now a ghost within his own walls. A tragic accident on a rain-slicked highway had left the feared boss paralyzed from the neck down, confined to a motorized wheelchair. He sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring at the gray sky, his eyes vacant and unblinking. People said his mind had withered along with his legs. They said he was nothing more than a living statue, a wealthy piece of furniture. Into this house of silence came Mina, a young girl with a heart of gold and pockets filled with nothing but debt. She was hired as the new maid, a girl from a small village who knew nothing of crime or shadows. She only knew that her sick mother needed medicine and that the Kang mansion paid 3 times the normal wage. As she stepped through the iron gates, the air felt heavy, like a storm was brewing just behind the clouds. Little did she know the silence of the house was a lie. There were eyes everywhere, and the most dangerous eyes belonged to the man who supposedly couldn't even lift a finger to swat a fly. Mina smoothed her white apron, took a deep breath, and walked into the dragon's den, unaware that her life was about to change forever. The manager of the household was a man named Mr. Choi. He was a man with an oily smile and eyes that flickered like a snake's tongue. Mr. Choi had been with the Kang family for 10 years, starting as a lowly driver and working his way up through flattery and deceit. Now that the great boss was broken, Mr. Choi acted as if he owned the marble floors he walked upon. He took Mina to the kitchen, his hand lingering just a bit too long on her shoulder as he pointed out her duties. "This is a quiet house, Mina," he whispered, his breath smelling of expensive cigarettes and cheap greed. "The master sees nothing, the master hears nothing, which means I am the one you must please. Do you understand?" Mina felt a shiver run down her spine. She nodded quickly, pulling away from his touch to scrub the counters. She watched as Mr. Choi walked away, his gait arrogant and bold. He didn't look like a servant, he looked like a thief who had found the keys to the vault. Later that evening, she was tasked with bringing a tray of broth to the master's study. The room was cold, lit only by the flickering embers in the fireplace. There sat Kang Dae-hyun. He was younger than she expected, perhaps in his 30s, with sharp features and hair as black as a raven's wing. His hands lay limp on the armrests of his high-tech chair. Mina set the tray down softly. "Sir?" she whispered. There was no response. His eyes were fixed on a painting on the far wall. She felt a wave of pity for him, a lion trapped in a cage of his own skin. As the days passed, Mina realized that the Kang mansion was not a home, but a battlefield. The other servants were terrified of Mr. Choi. He docked their pay for the smallest mistakes and held secret meetings in the basement with men who didn't look like gardeners or cooks. These men wore heavy jackets and had scars across their knuckles. Mina kept her head down, focusing on her work. She spent most of her time cleaning the master's study. She started talking to him, even though he never answered. She told him about the flowers blooming in the garden, the taste of the salt air from her home village, and the stories her grandmother used to tell. "They think you're gone, don't they? But I think you're just resting. Everyone needs a rest sometimes." She didn't notice the slight twitch in Dae-hyun's right index finger. She didn't see the way his pupils dilated when she hummed a soft lullaby. To the rest of the world, he was a vegetable, a useless relic of a dying empire. But to Mina, she treated him like a human being. Mr. Choi, however, treated the master like an obstacle. He would walk into the room and talk loudly on his phone about selling off the family's assets. He would mock the paralyzed man, blowing smoke in his face and laughing. "Look at you, great dragon. A puddle of water has more spine than you. Soon I'll have the deeds, and you'll have a one-way ticket to a nursing home in the middle of nowhere." Mina, hidden behind the heavy velvet curtains, gripped her cleaning rag tight. Her heart burned with a silent, helpless rage. The atmosphere in the house grew darker as the Lunar New Year approached. Mr. Choi's behavior became bolder and more predatory. He began to corner Mina in the hallways, making comments about her beauty and how a girl like her shouldn't be wasting her life scrubbing floors. "I could make you the lady of this house," he told her one evening, trapping her between his arms against the cold stone wall of the pantry. Mina pushed him away, her voice trembling but firm. "I am here to work, Mr. Choi, nothing more." He laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Work? You think this is work? You're a mouse in a house full of cats, Mina, and I am the king cat here." He reached out to touch her face, but a loud crash from the study interrupted him. They both froze. It sounded like glass shattering. Choi cursed and ran toward the master's room, with Mina trailing behind. Inside, they found a crystal vase shattered on the floor. The master was sitting exactly where he always was, his expression unchanged. "How did that happen?" Choi barked at a terrified junior maid. I don't know, sir. It just slid off the table." Choi slapped the junior maid across the face. "Liar, pay attention or I'll throw you out in the snow." Mina rushed to help the girl, but her eyes drifted to the master. For a split second, she thought she saw a glint of satisfaction in his dark eyes. It was gone as quickly as a spark in the wind, but it left her breathless. Was it possible? Was the great dragon truly watching? She looked at the wheelchair, then at the man. He was as still as death, yet the air around him felt electric. That night, Mina couldn't sleep. The image of the master's eyes haunted her. She decided to sneak down to the kitchen to get some more milk to calm her nerves. The house was a labyrinth of shadows at night. As she reached the bottom of the grand staircase, she heard voices coming from the library. It was Mr. Choi and two of the scarred men. She hid behind a large porcelain urn, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "The lawyer will be here tomorrow." Choi's voice was low and jagged. "He's got the papers ready. We just need the master's thumbprint. Since the idiot can't move, we'll just press his hand to the ink and then to the paper. By midnight, the Kang fortune will be ours, and the accident that took his legs will finally finish the job and take his life." Minna gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. They were planning to kill him. They had caused the accident, and now they were going to steal everything and murder the man she had come to care for? She had to do something. She had to call the police or run or wake the master up. But who would believe a maid? The police were likely in Choi's pocket, and the master was a prisoner in his own body. She felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. As she turned to flee back to her room, she tripped over the edge of a rug. The sound was small, but in the dead of the night, it sounded like a gunshot. "Who's there?" Choi shouted. Minna didn't wait. She bolted up the stairs, her feet flying over the carpet. She made it to her room and locked the door, leaning against it as her lungs burned. She heard heavy footsteps in the hallway, pausing outside her door. She held her breath, praying to every god she knew. After a long, agonizing minute, the footsteps moved on. Minna knew she was in grave danger. If Choi suspected she had heard them, she wouldn't live to see the sunrise. She spent the rest of the night packing a small bag, but then she looked at the photo of her mother on her bedside table. If she ran, she would have no money, and the master would die alone. She couldn't leave him. He was the only one who hadn't tried to hurt her in this den of wolves. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Mr. Choi was unusually polite, his eyes tracking Minna's every move with a predatory hunger. "You look tired, Minna," he said during breakfast. "Perhaps you should spend the afternoon in the kitchen. We have a big dinner tonight, a celebration." He smiled, and Minna felt like she was looking at a tombstone. She went to the kitchen, her hands shaking as she chopped vegetables. She kept looking at the clock. The lawyer was coming. The end was near. She needed a plan, but she was just a girl with a knife and a pile of carrots. She looked out the window and saw a black sedan pulling up the driveway. The lawyer had arrived. The wolves were gathering for the feast, and the dragon was still asleep, or so they thought. In the study, the scene was being set for a crime. Mr. Choi had cleared the room of all other servants. He stood over Kang Dae-hyun, who was positioned near the desk. The lawyer, a thin man with gold-rimmed glasses and a soul made of ledger sheets, laid out the documents. "It's all here," the lawyer said. "Transfer of power, sale of the shipping docks, and the liquidation of the private accounts." Choi grinned, his face twisting into a mask of pure evil. "Wonderful. Let's get his mark." He grabbed Kang Dae-hyun's limp right hand. The master's skin was cold, his fingers pale. Choi pressed the thumb into a thick pad of black ink. Minna, who had been ordered to bring tea, stood at the door, her tray trembling. She saw Choi raising the master's hand to the paper. "Stop!" she cried out, unable to contain herself. Choi spun around, his eyes flashing with fury. "Get out, you brat! This is family business." Minna didn't move. "You're stealing from him. You're going to kill him. I heard you last night." The lawyer looked nervous, but Choi just laughed. "And who will you tell? The walls? You're nothing, Minna, just a piece of trash I picked up from the gutter." He turned back to the desk, pressing Kang Dae-hyun's thumb toward the paper. "Now sign your life away, you useless cripple." The thumb was an inch from the paper when it happened. A sound filled the room, a low, mechanical hum. The motorized wheelchair suddenly jolted backward, pulling Kang Dae-hyun's hand away from the desk. Choi stumbled, losing his grip on the master's hand. He looked at the wheelchair, confused. What did you do?" he hissed at the lawyer. "I didn't do anything," the lawyer stammered. The wheelchair began to spin in a slow circle, the motor whining. Then it stopped abruptly, facing the window. For the first time in months, the master's head moved. He didn't just tilt it, he lifted it, his neck muscles corded and strong. He turned his head slowly towards Mr. Choi. His eyes were no longer vacant. They were burning with a cold, lethal intelligence. A low, gravelly voice, unused for a long time, vibrated through the air. "I see everything." The words were like ice shards. Choi froze, his face turning the color of ash. "Master, you can speak?" The Dae-hyun's lips curled into a predatory smile, the smile of the dragon. "I see the way you steal, I see the way you lie, and I see the way you put your filthy hands on what belongs to me." He looked at Minna, and for a heartbeat, the coldness in his eyes softened, especially the girl. Choi backed away, his hands shaking. "It's a trick. You're paralyzed. The doctors said—" "The doctors were paid by me to say what I wanted them to say," Dae-hyun interrupted, his voice gaining strength. "I needed to know who my friends were, and I needed to know who the rats were. It turns out my house is infested." Mr. Choi's shock quickly turned into desperate aggression. He realized that if the master was alive and aware, his own life was forfeit. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a snub-nosed revolver. "So you've been playing a game," Choi spat, his voice cracking. "Well, games end. You might be able to talk, but you still can't walk. You're still a prisoner in that chair. I'll just kill you now and take the girl with me. The lawyer will still make the papers work." The lawyer looked like he was about to faint, clutching his briefcase to his chest. Min-ah screamed, "Run!" But there was nowhere for the master to go. Dae-hyun didn't look afraid. He looked bored. "You always were short-sighted, Choi. That's why you were a driver and never a leader." He reached down to the side of his chair. To everyone's horror, his paralyzed hand moved with lightning speed. He pressed a button on the armrest. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the study slammed shut and locked with a series of metallic clicks. Steel shutters slid down over the windows, plunging the room into semi-darkness, lit only by the red glow of emergency lights. "You think you're the only one who brought friends to the party?" Dae-hyun asked. From the shadows of the bookshelves, 3 men stepped out. They were dressed in black tactical gear, carrying silenced submachine guns. They were the master's personal guard, men who had been hiding in plain sight for months, waiting for the signal. Choi fired a shot, but his hand was shaking so badly the bullet went wide, shattering a lamp. Before he could fire again, one of the guards moved like a blur, kicking the gun out of Choi's hand and pinning him to the floor. The lawyer dropped to his knees, begging for mercy, tears streaming down his face. Dae-hyun stood up. He didn't struggle. He didn't wobble. He rose from the wheelchair with the grace of a panther. He walked over to the cowering Mr. Choi, his footsteps echoing like drum beats on the hardwood floor. He looked down at the man who had tried to ruin him. "The accident was your first mistake," Dae-hyun said, his voice a deadly silk. "Thinking I was a fool was your second, but touching her—" He glanced at Min-ah, who was standing by the door, wide-eyed and trembling. "That was your last." He signaled to his men. "Take them to the basement. I'll deal with them once the sun goes down. Ensure the lawyer loses his license and his tongue." As the guards dragged the screaming Choi and the sobbing lawyer away, the room fell into a heavy, ringing silence. Dae-hyun stood in the center of the room, the red light casting long, demonic shadows behind him. He looked like the king of the underworld he truly was. Then he turned to Min-ah. He walked toward her, and for a moment she wanted to run. He was a monster, a man of violence and secrets. But as he reached her, he stopped. He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek. Min-ah didn't flinch. She saw the man behind the monster, the man who had listened to her stories about the sea and the flowers. "You stayed. Why did you stay? You knew they were dangerous." Min-ah found her voice, though it was small. "Because you were alone. Everyone deserves someone to look out for them, even a dragon." Dae-hyun's expression shifted, a flicker of genuine emotion crossing his face. He dropped his hand, turning away to look at the steel-shuttered windows. "The world thinks I am a broken man. Let them keep thinking that for a little longer. There are other rats to flush out of the grain bins." He looked back at her. "You are no longer a maid, Min-ah. You are under my protection. From this day forward, no one in this city will so much as look at you the wrong way." Min-ah looked at the empty wheelchair, then at the powerful man standing before her. The mystery of the Kang mansion was far from over. She had walked into a den of wolves and found herself guarded by the king of beasts. "What happens now?" she asked. Dae-hyun smiled, a dark, beautiful thing. "Now we clean the house." Over the next few days, the mansion changed. The air of fear vanished, replaced by a sharp, disciplined energy. The crooked servants were gone, replaced by people Dae-hyun trusted. Min-ah was given a suite of rooms on the top floor. She was no longer scrubbing floors, she was the master's confidant. But the danger wasn't gone. Mr. Choi had been working with a rival syndicate, the Baek clan, who were waiting for word that the Kang Empire was ripe for the picking. When Choi didn't call, they grew suspicious. One rainy evening, a fleet of black SUVs appeared at the gates. The guards at the entrance were silenced, and a group of armed men breached the perimeter. Min-ah was in the library, reading a book on history, when the alarms began to wail. It wasn't a loud siren, but a low-frequency hum that vibrated in the bones. The lights flickered and died. She heard the sound of glass breaking downstairs, and the staccato rhythm of gunfire. Her heart raced. She remembered what Dae-hyun had said about the house being a fortress. She ran toward the study, knowing that's where he would be. She found him in the dark, standing by the monitors that showed the security feeds. "He's here," he said, not looking away from the screens. "The Baek clan. They think they can take what is mine while I am recovering." He turned to her, his face illuminated by the blue light of the monitors. "Go to the safe room, Min-ah, now." "No," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'm not leaving you." He looked at her, a spark of admiration in his eyes. "You're a stubborn girl. Fine. Stay behind me and stay low." The door to the study burst open. 3 men in tactical gear rushed in, their muzzles flashing. Dae-hyun didn't flinch. He flipped the heavy mahogany desk on its side with a strength that seemed superhuman, creating a barricade for him and Minna. He pulled a custom-made handgun from a hidden compartment under the desk and returned fire with terrifying precision. Each of his shots found a mark. The room was filled with the smell of gunpowder and the deafening roar of combat. Minna huddled behind the desk, her hands over her ears. She had never seen this side of the world, the raw, brutal reality of the power struggle. Dae-hyun moved with a cold efficiency, his eyes never losing their focus. He wasn't just defending himself, he was hunting. "Stay down," he commanded as he moved from behind the desk to finish off the remaining attackers. The fight was over in minutes. The study was a wreck, but Dae-hyun was untouched. He stood over the fallen men, his breathing even. He looked at Minna and held out his hand. The house is compromised. We have to move. They traveled through a secret passage hidden behind a bookshelf, leading to an underground garage. There, a sleek, armored car was waiting. As they sped away from the mansion, Minna looked back. The great house on the hill was glowing with the light of fires and muzzle flashes. Her old life was gone. She was now a part of the dragon's world, a world of shadows, blood, and a strange, fierce loyalty. They arrived at a safe house in the heart of Gangnam, a high-rise penthouse that looked like a temple of modern luxury. Here, Dae-hyun's true power was on display. He had a small army of tech experts and soldiers at his beck and call. For the next week, Minna watched as he dismantled the Beck clan from his laptop. He didn't use guns this time. He used money and information. He crashed their stocks, leaked their secrets to the authorities, and turned their own allies against them. It was a silent, bloodless massacre. Throughout it all, he kept Minna by his side. He bought her silk dresses and pearls, but she still felt like the girl from the village. One night, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the neon lights of Seoul, she asked him, "Why did you pretend to be paralyzed for so long? You could have ended this months ago." Dae-hyun looked at the horizon, his eyes reflecting the city lights. "In my world, everyone wants to be the king. If you are strong, they plot in the dark. If you are weak, they show their true faces. I needed to see who would betray me when I had nothing left to give. And I needed to find someone who saw me, not just the throne." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "I found you." Minna felt a blush creep up her neck. "I just thought you were a lonely man who needed a friend." He laughed, a soft, genuine sound. "And that is exactly why I will never let you go." The Beck clan was finally neutralized, their leaders in prison or in hiding. The Kang mansion was being rebuilt, stronger and more secure than ever. Dae-hyun's recovery was miraculously announced to the public, though the truth was kept within his inner circle. He returned to his position as the head of the syndicate, but things were different now. He was less of a tyrant and more of a ruler. He started investing in legitimate businesses, moving the family's wealth into tech and green energy, a shift that Minna had encouraged. Mr. Choi and the lawyer were never heard from again. Some said they were sent to work in the salt mines of a distant land. Others whispered a darker fate. Minna didn't ask. She knew the world she lived in now had a price. On the day they moved back into the mansion, Dae-hyun took her to the kitchen where it had all started. The counters were new, the air fresh. He took her hand in his grip strong and warm. "I told you I see everything." "And what do you see now?" she asked. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "I see a future, one where the dragon doesn't have to fight alone." Minna smiled, realizing that the paralyzed boss had not only regained his strength, but had found a heart. The story of the Maid and the Mafia boss became a legend in the underground, a tale of how a girl's kindness awaked a sleeping dragon and how the dragon, in turn, burned down a world of lies to keep her safe. Life at the mansion settled into a new rhythm. Minna was no longer the maid, but she refused to sit idle. She took over the management of the household staff, ensuring everyone was treated with the respect Mr. Choi had denied them. She implemented fair wages and health care for the families of the guards. Dae-hyun watched her with a mixture of pride and amusement. "You're turning my fortress into a charity," he joked one morning over breakfast. "I'm turning it into a home," she countered, sliding a plate of fresh fruit toward him. "A home doesn't need to fear its master." He took a piece of apple, his eyes thoughtful. "Fear is a powerful tool, Minna. In my world, it's often the only one that works." "Maybe," she said, leaning across the table, "but loyalty born of love is much stronger. A man who fears you will stab you in the back the moment you blink. A man who loves you will die to keep you standing." Dae-hyun went silent, the weight of her words sinking in. He had spent his whole life building walls and sharpening swords. He was realizing that the strongest armor wasn't made of steel, but of the bonds he formed with those around him. However, the shadows of his past were not so easily dismissed. A new threat was emerging from across the sea, a Japanese Yakuza group looking to fill the vacuum left by the Bake clan. They didn't care about honor or long-term stability. They only wanted chaos and profit. The Yakuza sent a message in the form of a package delivered to the front gate. Inside was a single black lotus flower made of cold iron. It was a declaration of war. Dae-hyun's advisors were worried. "They are ruthless, master," his head of security, Jin-ho, warned. "They don't follow the old rules. They target families. They target civilians." His eyes flickered briefly toward Mina, who was sitting in the corner of the room. Dae-hyun's jaw tightened. The air in the room suddenly dropped several degrees. "Increase the guard," he commanded, his voice a low growl. "Nobody leaves the grounds without a 4-man escort, and Mina stays in the inner sanctum." Mina didn't argue this time. She could see the tension in the way the guards moved, the way they checked their weapons twice. She spent her days in the library, but the books couldn't distract her from the feeling of being watched. She began to notice small things: a strange car parked at the end of the long driveway, a flicker of light from the woods at night. She realized that the Yakuza weren't just attacking, they were scouting. They were looking for the dragon's weakness, and they had found it. One afternoon, while Mina was in the garden, a small drone buzzed overhead. It didn't drop a bomb or fire a shot. It simply hovered for a moment, its camera lens pointing directly at her, before flying away. That night, she told Dae-hyun about the drone. His reaction was immediate. He called a meeting of all his captains. The dragon was preparing for fire. The tension reached a breaking point on a night when the moon was hidden by thick black clouds. The Yakuza launched a coordinated strike. They didn't come in cars. They came through the woods, using high-tech stealth gear. The mansion's exterior sensors were jammed, and the first the guards knew of the attack was when the perimeter lights went dark. Mina was in her room when the power cut out. The backup generators kicked in, but the light was a dim, haunting red. She heard the sound of muffled explosions and the rhythmic thwip of silenced weapons. She remembered Dae-hyun's instruction: go to the inner sanctum. It was a reinforced room in the center of the house, accessible only by a biometric scanner. As she ran through the darkened hallways, she saw figures moving in the shadows. They weren't Dae-hyun's men. They were wearing masks and carried curved blades. She ducked into a closet just as a group of them passed by. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it would burst. She waited until the footsteps faded, then continued her desperate sprint. She reached the door to the sanctum, her hand shaking as she pressed it to the scanner. "Access denied," the screen flashed. The power surge must have glitched the system. She was trapped in the hallway, and the hunters were closing in. Suddenly, a hand grabbed her arm and pulled her into a side room. She opened her mouth to scream, but a familiar hand covered it. It was Dae-hyun. "Quiet," he whispered. He was dressed in black, a combat vest strapped over his shirt. He looked like the god of war. "The system is down. They're inside." He handed her a small, sleek device. "This is a panic button. If we get separated, press it, and my men will find you. But for now, you stay with me." They moved through the house like ghosts. Dae-hyun knew every inch of the mansion, every secret crawl space and hidden door. He used the environment to his advantage, taking out the invaders one by one with a ruthless efficiency that left Mina breathless. He didn't use a gun. He used a short black baton that crackled with electricity. It was silent and deadly. They reached the grand foyer where the main battle was raging. Jin-ho and the other guards were holding the line against a wave of Yakuza attackers. The air was thick with smoke and the metallic scent of blood. "We need to get to the garage," Dae-hyun said, his eyes scanning the room. "The armored car is our only way out." They fought their way toward the back of the house, but as they reached the kitchen, the place where it all began, they were blocked by a man standing by the center island. He was tall, with a long scar running down his face and eyes that were as cold as a winter's grave. He held a long, traditional katana. "Kang Dae-hyun, the Dragon of the East. I have waited a long time to see if the legends were true." Dae-hyun stepped in front of Mina, his posture relaxed but ready. "And you are Kenji," he said, "the butcher of Osaka. I heard you were retired." Kenji laughed, a sound like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "A butcher never retires as long as there is meat to carve. And you, Kang, are a very expensive piece of meat." He raised his sword, the steel gleaming in the red emergency light. Dae-hyun didn't have a sword. He only had his baton and his bare hands. The fight that followed was a blur of motion. Kenji was fast, his blade cutting through the air with a terrifying whistle. Dae-hyun was faster, dodging the strikes by inches and countering with precise, bone-breaking blows. Mina watched from behind a counter, her eyes wide. She realized that this was the world Dae-hyun lived in every day, a world where life and death were decided in the space of a heartbeat. Dae-hyun managed to catch Kenji's wrist, twisting it until the sword dropped to the tile floor. He then delivered a powerful kick to the man's chest, sending him crashing through a glass-fronted cabinet. Kenji didn't get up. Dae-hyun picked up the katana and looked at it for a moment before tossing it aside. "Let's go," he said to Mina, his voice calm. They reached the garage and sped away into the night, the mansion once again a theater of fire behind them. But this time, they weren't running to hide. They were running to finish it. They spent the next few hours at a secondary safe house, a quiet apartment in a residential neighborhood where no one would look for a mafia boss. Dae-hyun spent the time on a secure satellite phone, coordinating a counterstrike. "I've had enough of playing defense," he told Mina as he cleaned a small cut on his arm. "The Yakuza think they can bring their war to my home. Now I will bring the war to theirs." By morning, the news was flooded with reports of a massive police raid on a Japanese shipping company in the harbor. Tons of illegal cargo were seized and dozens of Yakuza members were arrested. It wasn't a coincidence. Dae-hyun had fed the authorities every piece of evidence he had been gathering for months. He had used the Yakuza's own greed against them, leading them into a trap that ended their influence in Korea for good. The butcher of Osaka was handed over to the authorities in a gift-wrapped crate, along with enough evidence to keep him in prison for 3 lifetimes. As the sun rose over the city, a sense of peace finally began to settle. The threat was gone. The house was being repaired once again, but this time the security was being handled by a new, more loyal group of people. Mina sat on the sofa, exhausted but relieved. Dae-hyun sat next to her, his hand finding hers. "It's over," he said. "Truly over this time." Months passed, and the Kang mansion returned to its former glory, with a different soul. The glass and stone no longer felt cold. Flowers bloomed in every room, and the sound of laughter was no longer a stranger. Mina and Dae-hyun had grown closer, their bond forged in the fires of conflict. He had officially stepped down from the shadow trade, handing the reins to Jinho, who promised to run things with the new, more ethical standards Dae-hyun had set. Dae-hyun was now a legitimate businessman, focusing on his tech empire. One evening, he took Mina to the cliffs overlooking the sea, the very place she used to tell him about when he was paralyzed. The air was sweet with the scent of salt and pine. "You know," he said, looking out at the waves, "when I was sitting in that chair, pretending I couldn't move, I felt more trapped by my life than by my body. I thought my path was set in stone. I thought I would live and die a monster." He turned to her, his expression soft. "But then you came along. You talked to me like I was a person. You showed me that there was a world outside of power and fear." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring with a diamond as clear as a drop of morning dew. "Mina, you saved the dragon. Now will you stay and help him build something better?" Mina felt tears pricking her eyes. "I never planned on leaving," she whispered. The wedding was a small, private affair held in the mansion's garden. There were no reporters, no rival bosses, just the people who had stood by them. Mina wore a simple, elegant dress of white silk, and Dae-hyun looked every bit the noble king he had become. As they exchanged vows, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the ancient oak trees. It felt as if the house itself was breathing a sigh of relief. The legend of the paralyzed boss and his maid became a story told by the staff for generations. They spoke of the night the master stood up and the way the shadows fled from the light the girl brought into the house. They lived a quiet, meaningful life. Dae-hyun used his wealth to build schools and hospitals, making amends for the sins of his past. Mina remained by his side, his anchor and his heart. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl, who grew up knowing nothing of the shadow trade, only the stories of their father's strength and their mother's kindness. But even in their peaceful life, Dae-hyun never forgot the lesson he learned. He still had a study where he kept a close eye on the world. He still saw everything, but now he used what he saw to protect, not to destroy. One day, years later, a young man was caught trying to steal from the mansion's storage. The guards brought him to the study, where an older, white-haired Dae-hyun sat behind his mahogany desk. The boy was trembling, expecting a beating or worse. He had heard the old stories about the Dragon of the East. Dae-hyun looked at him for a long time, his eyes as sharp as ever. "Why did you do it?" he asked, his voice calm. My sister is sick, sir," the boy stammered. "We have no money for the doctor." Dae-hyun went silent, memories of a young girl with a heart of gold and a sick mother flooding back to him. He looked at the boy and saw a mirror of the past. He didn't call the police. Instead, he wrote a check and handed it to the boy. "Take this. Get your sister the help she needs, and then come back here. I have a job for you in the gardens. We need someone who knows the value of family." The boy cried as he thanked him, and as he was led away, Min-ah walked into the room, a tray of tea in her hands. She smiled at her husband. "Still seeing everything, I see," she said. He stood up and took the tray from her, kissing her forehead. "I see a boy who needs a chance, just like I did."